On February 16, 2005, a padded envelope arrived at the KSAS TV television station in Wichita, Kansas, containing a piece of jewelry, a postcard, and a single purple 1.44 megabyte Memorex floppy disk that would finally break a 30-year reign of terror. This small piece of magnetic storage held the key to unmasking a monster. For decades, a phantom had communicated through letters and cryptic puzzles, establishing a twisted system of communication that forced the media and law enforcement to play a deadly game on his terms. Operating under the self-assigned moniker of bind, torture, kill, he dropped packages in cereal boxes and library return slots to manipulate the public. Inside the police computer lab, investigators carefully inserted the purple disk into a secure drive, desperate for any slip-up from the meticulous predator who had haunted their city. Using right-blocking hardware to ensure they did not accidentally alter the evidence, the forensic examiners created an exact digital replica of the disk for their intense analysis. They bypassed the main files and dug deep into the hidden layers of the disk, searching the deleted space where invisible digital footprints often hide from the average computer user. When a file is deleted, the computer simply removes the directory pointer, leaving the underlying binary data intact within the unallocated slack space of the drive. A deleted Microsoft Word document surfaced from the digital shadows, carrying a piece of hidden data known as metadata. This embedded information acts as a digital fingerprint, automatically generated by the word processing software to track file history, author credentials, and system pathways without ever displaying those details on the actual typed pages of the document. This invisible tag revealed that the document had been modified by a user named Dennis, operating on a computer registered to the Christ Lutheran Church. The software had quietly stamped the file with these exact registration details during a previous save, permanently linking the anonymous serial killer to a highly specific local religious institution. The gravity of that single name crashed into the detective room, a sudden blinding light cutting through 31 years of crushing darkness and frustrating dead ends. After processing thousands of DNA swabs, running down countless false leads, and staring at cold case boards for decades, the task force suddenly had a definitive geographic and personal anchor. Generations of investigators had retired with broken hearts, haunted by the faces of 10 innocent victims, and now the answer was sitting quietly on a glowing monitor. Millions of dollars and thousands of man-hours had been poured into the manhunt, only for the breakthrough to manifest as a few lines of hidden text on a computer screen. This catastrophic mistake did not come from a sudden loss of intelligence, but from an overwhelming sense of arrogance that had festered over 3 long decades. The killer had operated with flawless analog precision for years, but his desperate need to remain relevant in the modern media landscape pushed him to use technology he fundamentally misunderstood. He had actually asked the police through a newspaper classified ad if a floppy disk could be traced, and when they lied and said it could not, he believed them blindly. The police had published a message in the Wichita Eagle newspaper assuring him that digital communication was completely safe, weaponizing his own towering ego against him. Outside the sterile walls of the police precinct, the city of Wichita had existed in a state of quiet, lingering dread since the first bodies were found in January 1974. The brutal discovery of 4 members of the Otero family bound and strangled in their own home had fundamentally shattered the innocence of the entire Kansas community. Homes across the sprawling Kansas plains were locked tight every night, alarms were armed, and a collective shadow hung over the quiet suburban streets. Hardware stores continuously sold out of deadbolts. Children were forbidden from playing outside after dusk, and the constant media coverage of the taunting letters ensured the psychological terror dictated daily civilian life. The predator had built a rigid, horrifying system of operation, meticulously stalking his targets from afar before invading their perceived safe havens. He treated his murders as organized projects, carefully monitoring the daily schedules of his victims, cutting their external telephone lines and breaking into their houses to wait silently in the darkness for them to return. He bound his victims, tortured them for his own twisted gratification, and ultimately killed them, always leaving behind deliberate clues to mock the authorities. Over 17 years, he claimed 10 lives, extending his psychological control by mailing victim driver licenses, original poems, and detailed crime scene sketches to local television stations and frustrated homicide detectives. Armed with the new digital breadcrumb, detectives drove out to the Christ Lutheran Church, quietly requesting the names of anyone who had access to their computer system. They approached the church leadership discreetly, presenting the recovered metadata without revealing the full scope of the serial killer investigation, focusing entirely on finding the user simply known as Dennis. The church leadership provided a list of staff and volunteers, pointing directly to the president of the church congregation, a man named Dennis Rader. Church records confirmed he frequently used the office computer to print meeting agendas, and detectives quickly discovered his residential address was located on the very same street where an early victim was stalked. The terrifying phantom who had held an entire city hostage was not a brilliant criminal mastermind, but a mundane city compliance officer living a painfully ordinary life. Instead of an untouchable supervillain, Dennis Rader was a 60-year-old municipal worker for Park City, a local Cub Scout leader, and a married father of 2 hiding in plain sight. The digital slip-up stripped away his terrifying myth, exposing a pathetic man whose desperate need for attention ultimately engineered his own downfall. The recovered metadata dismantled his carefully crafted persona, providing the definitive evidence needed to secure a search warrant, extract a matching DNA sample, and finally end the longest and most notorious manhunt in Kansas history. The shadow of the BTK Killer hung over Wichita, Kansas, like a suffocating shroud, turning ordinary daily routines into acts of quiet, lingering terror. Families locked their doors twice, installed heavy deadbolts, and slept with loaded firearms nearby, haunted by the inescapable knowledge that a predator was moving freely among them. He was choosing his targets with a random, brutal precision that defied all conventional criminal profiling. For the loved ones left behind by the victims, the suffocating grief was compounded by a paralyzing, decades-long lack of answers. 30 years slipped by, turning vibrant memories into faded, fragile photographs, while the agonizing question of who destroyed their lives remained a constant open wound. Generations grew up under the dark mythology of a killer who seemed to have vanished completely into the Kansas wind, leaving nothing but cold cases behind. Then, in March 2004, after 25 years of agonizing silence, the Phantom decided to speak again. Stung by a local newspaper article suggesting he had been forgotten or was dead, a sudden flurry of taunting messages arrived at local media outlets. This unexpected resurgence reignited the terror across the city, but it also opened a fragile, unexpected door for the police who had waited nearly a lifetime for a fresh lead. Investigators immediately sensed a critical shift in the psychological game. They realized that this desperate, narcissistic need for public attention and legacy might finally push the elusive predator to make the one catastrophic mistake they had been waiting for since 1974. The killer was eager to prove his intelligence, unaware that his insatiable arrogance was actively blinding him to the profound advancements in modern criminal investigation techniques. Inside the Wichita Police Department headquarters, the atmosphere was electric, with a renewed, desperate tension. The dedicated BTK Task Force war room was a labyrinth of towering file cabinets and vast corkboards, every inch covered with gruesome crime scene photos, typed letters, and desperate timelines spanning 3 decades. Detectives worked around the clock, meticulously cataloging every new piece of correspondence, praying that the killer would inadvertently leave a microscopic, physical clue. Down the hall, in the sterile, windowless digital forensics laboratory, the cold glow of computer monitors cast long shadows across the faces of exhausted technicians. It was in this quiet, climate-controlled room that the analog past and the high-tech future of the investigation finally collided. The detectives realized that traditional fingerprint dusting and DNA swabbing might not be the weapons that ultimately brought the notorious serial killer to justice. For 30 years, the hunt had relied entirely on the physical world, tracking a phantom through painstakingly typed letters, blurry Xerox photocopies, and analog evidence left at brutal crime scenes. The rules of the chase were strictly bound by the limitations of paper, ink, and postmarks. Investigators had spent thousands of hours analyzing the alignment of typewriter keys and the chemical composition of saliva on postage stamps, yielding agonizingly few definitive answers. But as the years passed, the world had quietly rewritten those investigative rules, building an invisible, inescapable web of digital footprints. The killer, arrogant and stubbornly stuck in his old methods of taunting the authorities, fundamentally failed to understand that modern technology records secrets that the human eye cannot see. He mistakenly believed that a digital document was just a modern piece of paper, completely oblivious to the hidden architecture of electronic files. When a purple 1.44 megabyte floppy disk arrived at KSS-TV in Wichita in February 2005, detectives did not just look at the taunting Microsoft Word document saved on the surface. They immediately handed the disk over to digital forensic experts who bypassed the visible text and dug straight into the hidden architecture of the file. The killer had even asked the police if a floppy disk could be traced, and the police had publicly lied, assuring him it was completely safe. Using specialized data recovery software, the technicians examined the document's metadata, the automatic digital tags created by the computer itself every time a file is saved or modified. They sifted through the buried hexadecimal code, searching for any trace of the machine or the specific person who had created the file. This invisible layer of information acts as a digital fingerprint, recording a precise history of the document's origins without the user's knowledge. Deep within that hidden digital layer, the software uncovered a deleted text string that had survived in the unallocated space on the disk. It was a single, devastating piece of information, a registration name hard-coded into the software itself by the user, reading simply, Dennis. Alongside that first name, the forensic software extracted another vital piece of embedded data, revealing that the computer was registered to the Christ Lutheran Church. That one word struck like a heavy hammer against the carefully cultivated myth of the untouchable criminal mastermind. The terrifying phantom who had held an entire city hostage for decades, self-titled as the BTK Killer, was suddenly reduced to a common first name, bound to a specific, traceable computer terminal. The impenetrable armor of his terrifying persona had been pierced by a routine software registration prompt he likely forgot he had even completed. The revelation sent a deep, unsettling chill through the investigative team, replacing the initial thrill of discovery with a heavy, sinking dread. The boogeyman was not a brilliant, shadowy outcast living on the fringes of society, plotting his crimes from a dark, isolated basement. The metadata suggested a far more terrifying reality, pointing directly toward an integrated, active member of the local community who attended church and used public computers. He was a normal man, someone with a mundane name who likely walked the exact same streets, shopped at the same local grocery stores, and smiled at his neighbors every single morning. The profound horror lay in the realization that pure evil had been hiding in plain sight for 30 years, masquerading as aggressively ordinary. He had seamlessly blended into the fabric of the Wichita suburbs, hiding his monstrous compulsions behind a mask of civic duty. The first name alone was not nearly enough to make a legal arrest, but it was the crucial loose thread that would rapidly unravel a carefully constructed double life. Detectives immediately cross-referenced the name Dennis with the other hidden piece of metadata, the direct link to the local Christ Lutheran Church. This combination of a first name and a specific community institution narrowed the suspect pool from hundreds of thousands down to a mere handful of individuals. A rapid search of the church leadership board instantly connected the digital breadcrumbs to a horrifying physical reality. The database returned a full name, locking the crosshairs of a 30-year manhunt directly on to Dennis Rader, the president of the church congregation and a local compliance officer. The digital forensics had achieved in a matter of hours what decades of traditional police work, psychological profiling, and massive public tip lines had failed to accomplish. His life existed in a quiet, unassuming suburban neighborhood in Park City, Kansas, where neatly trimmed lawns and paved driveways painted a picture of absolute, unbroken normalcy. It was a place where children played freely in the streets, completely unaware of the dark, violent history residing just behind a nearby front door. Rader was a married father of two, a man who issued citations for overgrown grass while secretly harboring the memories of 10 brutal murders. Inside his local church, the polished wooden pews and bright-stained glass windows reflected a life of community service and quiet devotion. This peaceful sanctuary stood in stark, horrifying contrast to the brutal secrets its congregation president had kept buried for so long. As detectives prepared to move in, they marveled at how a man who had meticulously evaded capture for decades was finally undone by a microscopic string of electronic code. For decades, the city of Wichita operated under an invisible siege, forced to develop intricate systems just to manage the sheer volume of fear radiating from unsolved murders. The Wichita Police Department constructed massive, dedicated filing infrastructures inside their headquarters, devoting entire rooms to a single phantom who had terrorized their streets since 1974. Every threatening letter mailed to local newspapers, every taunting phone call recorded by dispatchers, and every piece of physical evidence was cataloged in a sprawling paper database that grew heavier with each passing year. This labyrinth of steel filing cabinets and thick manila folders became the physical memory of a traumatized city that simply could not forget the killer. When new communications suddenly arrived in March 2004, ending a quarter-century of silence, Wichita detectives initiated strict new protocols for handling the volatile evidence. Officers wearing double layers of nitrile gloves carefully retrieved a padded envelope dropped in a local park, ensuring no modern biological contamination ruined the surface before it reached the laboratory. Inside the secure forensic laboratory, technicians placed the paper under specialized alternate light sources, desperately searching for microscopic traces of saliva on postal stamps or stray hairs trapped in the envelope adhesive. Every physical inch of the package was swabbed for touch DNA, photographed and meticulously logged before anyone even read the chilling words written inside. The sudden arrival of these new messages triggered an immediate, terrifying chain reaction across the entire state of Kansas. Local news stations like KKTV interrupted their daily television broadcasts, flashing images of the killer's distinct block-lettered handwriting and his infamous signature symbol to millions of viewers who thought the nightmare was long over. This widespread television broadcast led to a massive surge in public panic, as hardware stores across Kansas completely sold out of heavy deadbolts, security cameras, and firearms in a matter of hours. The state government was forced to mobilize unprecedented resources, funneling Kansas Bureau of Investigation agents and federal profilers into the region to hunt a ghost who had suddenly returned to life. Beneath the massive police mobilization lay a profound, suffocating dread that gripped thousands of families across the Kansas plains. Parents who had been vulnerable children during the very first wave of home invasions now found themselves looking out their own living room windows, terrified that the monster had returned to target their own sons and daughters. For the aging police detectives who had worked the original crime scenes, the emotional toll of this resurgence was absolutely devastating. They were haunted by the brutalized faces of the victims they had failed to save in the 1970s, carrying a heavy, silent guilt that reignited into burning obsession the exact moment the killer decided to speak again. Bridging the massive investigative gap between the first brutal family massacre in 1974 and the sudden reemergence leading into 2005 required law enforcement to connect two entirely different eras of police work. The world had fundamentally transformed its communication infrastructure, while the killer remained silent and hidden in the shadows. The investigation had to pivot rapidly from an era defined by rotary telephones, carbon copy paper, and physical typewriters to a modern landscape built on cellular towers and instant digital data transmission. The killer thought he was playing the exact same cat-and-mouse game, completely unaware that the scientific rules of hunting serial predators had changed forever. The physical environment of the Joint Police Task Force room perfectly captured this bizarre collision of different decades. Towering stacks of yellowing, dusty archive boxes containing thousands of handwritten field reports from the 1970s sat directly beside sleek, glowing computer monitors running advanced analytical databases designed to track modern communications. The walls of the command center were a chaotic patchwork of violent history, covered in fading black and white crime scene photographs pinned right next to sharp, modern digital maps utilizing geographic profiling software. The air in the room was stale with decaying old paper, yet charged with the frantic electric hum of modern computer servers processing thousands of desperate civilian tips. The critical flaw in his decades of careful planning was a simple, arrogant misunderstanding of how modern computer operating systems actually save and store digital information. When the killer asked police through a newspaper classified advertisement if a floppy disk could be traced, investigators published a deliberate lie, assuring him that the technology was completely safe and untraceable. He foolishly believed that simply deleting a typed document wiped it entirely from existence, completely unaware that the word processing software system secretly embeds hidden author information, known as metadata, deep within the background code of every single file created on the machine, preserving a permanent digital fingerprint of the original user. When a 1.44 megabyte purple Sony floppy disk finally arrived at a local television station in February 2005, a police digital forensics expert immediately took possession of the crucial package, carefully sliding the plastic square into a secure offline computer drive isolated from any external networks to prevent accidental data corruption. The forensic technician bypassed the visible files entirely and ran a specialized recovery program designed to scrape the hidden, unallocated sectors of the magnetic disk. Line by line, the software extracted the invisible metadata, pulling a previously deleted Microsoft Word document back from the digital grave to reveal the exact name of the last person who saved it. That microscopic digital footprint, consisting of just a few hidden kilobytes of background code, instantly shattered 30 years of impenetrable, terrifying anonymity. The extracted metadata clearly displayed the first name Dennis, along with an active registration link to the Christ Lutheran Church, providing the very first concrete lead in a generation. The hidden data pointed directly to that specific church computer, giving detectives the exact physical location they needed to issue a swift legal subpoena, identify congregation president Dennis Rader, secure matching DNA from his daughter, and finally put a pathetic face to the terror that had held an entire city hostage. For the Wichita Police Department, detectives staring at the glowing computer screen inside their forensic laboratory, the emotional whiplash was staggering. 30 years of hunting a phantom who called himself BTK had yielded nothing but dead ends, shattered families, and a Kansas community paralyzed by a nameless dread since the Otero family murders in January 1974. Now, a simple string of digital code buried deep within a recovered Microsoft Word document threatened to blow the darkest serial murder mystery in Kansas wide open. The families of 10 confirmed victims had waited 31 years for a miracle, and it was suddenly unfolding not in a bloody alleyway, but in the quiet hum of the police department computer crimes unit. This massive breakthrough hinged entirely on a single, astonishing act of arrogance by a killer desperate for media attention. The phantom who had outsmarted the authorities for a generation had made a fatal miscalculation in February 2005, trusting a purple 1.44 megabyte Memorex floppy disk mailed to a local television station to carry his final boastful taunt. He genuinely believed he was untraceable, completely blind to the silent digital footprints automatically generated by modern word processing software. After decades of relying on untraceable photocopies and hand-drawn stencils, that one catastrophic error in technological judgment completely shattered his carefully constructed illusion of invincibility and exposed his true identity to federal investigators. The origin of that fatal error traced back to a profoundly ordinary setting, located miles away from any of his grisly crime scenes. The digital trail led directly to a modest administrative office inside Christ Lutheran Church in Park City, Kansas, a place of quiet reflection where the killer actively served as the congregation president. There, sitting on a standard wooden desk, an unremarkable beige computer running Windows held the damning truth. On that specific machine, the killer had saved his document, unknowingly embedding the church name and the user profile Dennis directly into the hidden metadata property fields of the file, providing detectives with a precise first name and location. The hunt for a serial predator instantly transformed from a blind search involving thousands of dead-end tips into a highly targeted tactical operation. The old methods of chasing shadows and analyzing handwritten taunting letters were suddenly replaced by the cold, hard certainty of data tracking as investigators quickly cross-referenced the church leadership roster to find Dennis Rader. This discovery represented a fundamental shift in the very nature of the 30-year investigation. The elusive monster was no longer a terrifying phantom haunting the Midwest, but a specific 59-year-old man bound by the rigid rules of technology, traceable digital networks, and a physical address on Independence Street in Park City. To secure an airtight legal case, investigators needed to connect this new digital name to the ancient physical horrors of the 1970s crime scenes. Using a secret court warrant, they quietly obtained a routine medical pap smear belonging to Dennis Rader's daughter, securing the tissue sample from a Kansas State University medical clinic without tipping off their prime suspect. Forensic scientists at the Kansas Bureau of Investigation extracted the DNA from that medical sample and compared it against the biological evidence preserved from the 1974 Otero family murders. The laboratory results returned a conclusive familial match, scientifically bridging a 30-year gap between a modern computer file and the genetic profile of the killer. The trap finally closed on February 25, 2005, officially ending a reign of terror that had defined Wichita for an entire generation. Dennis Rader was driving toward his home on a quiet suburban street shortly after noon, when a line of unmarked police vehicles and tactical units suddenly swarmed his car, cutting off any avenue of escape. The man who had spent 3 decades playing God, binding and destroying 10 innocent lives with absolute authority, was instantly stripped of all control. He offered no physical resistance as he was pulled from his vehicle and placed into standard police handcuffs. His long, terrifying shadow finally dragged into the harsh light of a Kansas afternoon. For the community of Wichita, the public revelation of the killer's identity brought a terrifying, deeply unsettling shock. The monster who had haunted their nightmares was not a transient drifter or a social outcast, but a municipal animal control officer, a former Boy Scout leader, a husband, a father of 2, and a respected church president. The families of the victims, who had spent decades waiting for justice, were forced to confront the chilling reality that pure evil could wear such a painfully ordinary face. It was a profound psychological blow for the entire state, shattering the comforting illusion that violent psychopaths look like monsters rather than the friendly neighbor waving from across the street. Sitting inside a sterile Wichita police interrogation room, Dennis Rader finally realized how completely he had been undone by his own technological hubris. The capture was absolute, transitioning instantly from a desperate, decades-long manhunt into a cold, methodical confession that lasted over 30 hours as he detailed every single murder to Lieutenant Ken Landwehr. When confronted with the printed floppy disk metadata, his only defense was a pathetic expression of betrayal, famously asking the detectives why they had lied to him in a newspaper advertisement about the disk being untraceable. The fearsome predator, who had deceived his own family for 30 years, had been caught in a simple digital lie. The capture of Dennis Rader established a permanent, undeniable shift in the landscape of criminal investigations worldwide, elevating the importance of computer forensics. The boundaries of a crime scene expanded forever, moving far beyond physical blood evidence and latent fingerprints to encompass the vast, invisible architecture of the digital world and the hidden metadata inside everyday files. Today, every keystroke, every saved file, and every deleted document leaves a durable footprint in a hidden environment that investigators can easily recover. As Dennis Rader serves 10 consecutive life sentences in a Kansas maximum security prison, his case stands as permanent proof that the shadows where killers once hid are now permanently illuminated by the relentless, unblinking light of digital forensics. The arrest in Wichita did not just close a single cold case, it completely rewrote the rulebook for modern policing. Law enforcement agencies across the country realized that the invisible fingerprints left behind by floppy disks, word processors, and early internet connections were just as damning as physical blood drops or discarded shell casings. This realization forced a massive institutional shift, leading to the creation of dedicated digital forensics units in nearly every major police department. Detectives were no longer just looking for physical weapons. They were trained to hunt through hidden metadata, deleted files, and the silent code that tracks our every digital move. For the families of the 10 victims, the sudden resolution brought a complex, agonizing form of relief. Decades of looking over their shoulders, wondering if the monster who tore apart their lives was a neighbor, a coworker, or a stranger passing on the street, finally came to an abrupt end. The courtroom proceedings offered them a chance to confront the man who had caused so much devastation, but the legal victory could not erase the empty chairs at their dining tables. They were left to navigate a quiet, heavy aftermath, forced to rebuild their sense of safety in a world that had suddenly proven just how close darkness can hide. The public unmasking of the killer shattered a deeply held illusion about the early days of personal computing. Before 2005, many believed that a computer screen offered absolute anonymity, a safe wall to hide behind while interacting with the digital world. The revelation that a simple Microsoft Word document contained hidden author tags and save paths proved that the digital age had permanently erased true secrecy. It became a terrifying wake-up call for the public, proving that every keystroke, every saved file, and every digital interaction leaves an invisible trail that can always be followed back to its source. Yet, even with the killer securely behind bars and the digital puzzle completely solved, a chilling question remains unanswered. How could a man commit such brutal acts, meticulously document them, and then seamlessly blend back into his life as a respected church leader and family man for decades? The forensic evidence explains exactly how he was caught, detailing the fatal technological error that led police to his door, but it cannot explain the profound compartmentalization of his mind. The terrifying reality that such deep, predatory evil can perfectly mimic ordinary suburban life is a mystery that no amount of code or metadata will ever unravel. This watershed moment firmly established that no cold case is ever truly dead as long as physical or digital evidence remains preserved. The methods used to extract the hidden data from that purple floppy disk became a foundational blueprint for a new era of historical case reviews. Today, investigators routinely pull old evidence out of deep storage, running forgotten tapes, disks, and drives through modern forensic software. The sudden downfall of a phantom who had evaded capture for 30 years proved to every dormant killer that the relentless march of technology is a clock counting down to their eventual discovery. The city of Wichita itself was forever changed, marked by the long shadow of the decades-long hunt and the shocking banality of its conclusion. The neighborhoods where doors were once locked in terror slowly learned to breathe again, but the innocence of the community was permanently scarred. Residents now walk past the very streets, churches, and municipal buildings where the killer once freely roamed, carrying the unsettling knowledge of his hidden double life. The physical landscape of the city remains the same, but it is now layered with the grim, invisible history of a predator who hid in plain sight. Deep inside an evidence vault, That single purple floppy disk sits in quiet isolation, a seemingly harmless square of plastic that held the weight of 10 stolen lives. It remains a stark, silent monument to the moment a killer's supreme arrogance collided with the unforgiving memory of a machine.